Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback and on today's build we've got a new one for you. This is the Archon build. This is a combination of your Oathkeeper and Shaman classes, and we're going to focus this build on doing a lot of auto attacking while doing a lot of blocking and staying alive right in the thick of things. So if you are interested in tanky, melee-focused builds who can sit there and dish out punishment while taking all of it right back at the same time, you have come to the right place. However, this is the first video in a 3-part series and will be focused on the normal difficulty and getting acquainted with your abilities. There are a couple things that I'll throw in towards the end of the video that should make the grind from level 1 to 50 a little bit smoother, but if you are the type of player that already has the low car set and a whole bunch of clarity potions unlocked, get the best use that you can out of that stuff because the level 1 to 50 grind on this build can feel a little bit cumbersome at times. With all of that said though, let's get started because there are quite a few abilities to talk about, even though you're not going to see very many of them down there on the hotbar. Now you are going to want to start with your Oathkeeper tree because there are a couple abilities in this tree that will overall help your wave clear, your movement, and gathering up as much XP as possible in the early game. So, the first ability that we're going to take on the Oathkeeper side of things is an auto attack modifier by the name of Righteous Fervor. Righteous Fervor builds up charges and will deal more damage as it is charged up to a maximum of 6 levels. It's going to be doing physical and burn damage while using 100% of your weapon damage as well. So, as your gear upgrades, you are going to deal more damage with your Righteous Fervor ability. The modifiers that we're going to be interested in for this ability are only one, and that is going to be Consecration. Really, you just need 1 point into this early on. It's going to be more centered on pushing us further once we get to Ultimate, because Consecration comes with defensive ability as a baseline and elemental resistance as a baseline as well. It gives armor as a percentage too, and is more importantly than all that other stuff, giving us attack speed. But for now, Consecration should just have a single point or 2, and you can worry about maxing this bad boy out once you get into Ultimate difficulty. The next ability that is available right out the gate for the Oathkeeper class is Safeguard. And Safeguard is a passive bonus, but it does require that you use a shield. Safeguard is literally going to add physical flat damage to your kit, give you a buff to all damage, and give you a flat amount of armor as well. All of those things go up with levels into Safeguard, so it's not really flashy, but it is buffing the main damage type that we'll want to be using, which is physical damage. We're also going to be doing some internal trauma damage with this build as well, with some incidental fire, bleed, and pierce coming along as the build progresses. For the time being though, just remember Safeguard is a really easy passive to get your early level damage up quite a bit. Now the next few skills on the Oathkeeper tree aren't going to require too many points, but we do want to get the mastery bar up as quickly as we can because we have to get this up to Judgment. Judgment is going to be one of the first abilities that we put a big chunk of points into to get a lot of wave clear. So Judgment itself is going to activate on a 5-second cooldown, doing physical and internal trauma damage while knocking targets down for 1.5 seconds at level 7. It's also going to taunt targets, so it's going to force targets to attack you and get all those bad guys right into your melee range. Because this is a melee build, you want to have everybody as close as possible to you, and Judgment is going to do a magnificent job of that. Now, once you've picked up Judgment, you don't have to worry as much about the one modifier that we have in it until you complete the mastery bar for your Oathkeeper, but Heart of Wrath is just going to add retaliation damage to the damage of your Judgment, as well as giving it some fire and burn damage on top of that. More importantly though, it is going to increase the area in which Judgment hits, so we do want to get a lot of points into that, more so in Elite than we do in Normal. As it stands right now though, once you get about 7 points into Judgment, you can switch over to your Shaman tree, but there are a couple more abilities and passives in the Oathkeeper tree left to talk about. So the first passive we're going to mention outside of Judgment is going to be Presence of Virtue. And if you've seen any builds that I've done in this channel with an Oathkeeper, you know that Presence of Virtue is basically an always take. If you've got an Oathkeeper anything, you'll want to take Presence of Virtue because the buff that this provides is just unbelievably good. Now, being that Presence of Virtue is going to be more late game focused, at least the ability itself, you only have to get that 1 point so you can unlock the rest of the tree, but the ability, the passive, is going to give you a 100% chance of either internal trauma or bleeding damage over a period of time. You're going to get energy regen per second, as well as physical damage retaliation, but the stat that really makes sense for late game damage is going to be your offensive ability. Offensive ability is how you end up critting enemies in Grimdawn, so the more of that you have, the more often you can crit. And given that this is just a baseline offensive ability, you're going to want to take Presence of Virtue pretty quick. Now, the second modifier for Presence of Virtue is called Haven, and this one is much more important for the early game, so you'll want to get about 6 to 7 points in this as quick as you can. Haven is going to give you a % increase to your entire health bar, so the more flat health that you have, the more of an increase that Haven will give you to it. It's going to increase your healing effects, but it's also going to give us some very important stats that I mentioned early on in the video. So attack speed is one of those stats, but the next is going to be block chance. So block chance that we're getting from Haven only at level 7 is going to increase by 8%. It's also going to increase the amount of damage that the shield itself blocks, and again at level 7, that is going to be 30%. So, all that being said, this skill is going to increase the usefulness of your shield, and since this is going to be a very shield-oriented build, we want to have as many points in as possible. At least for normal difficulty's sake, 7 will do you just fine, but once we get into Elite and Ultimate, we really want to cap this out at 10, and then overmax it even further to get the biggest benefits out of it. Now, the final modifier for Presence of Virtue is called Rebuke, and this one you can get away with 1 or 2 points early on, but it is going to add flat physical damage to your kit, just passively while Presence of Virtue is activated, and it is going to give you a 5% reflected damage reduction, as well as a life reduction resistance of the same 5%. That's just at level 1, so anybody trying to cut your health apart with their big percentage damage is going to have to go through your resistance first. It's also going to buff your retaliation damage, which is never a bad thing because this build will have some retaliation built in as the difficulty goes up. And speaking of retaliation damage, there is another activatable, technically passive ability that we're going to pick up for the Oathkeeper called Ascension. Ascension is a 24-second cooldown, 10-second duration ability that you will press a button, and from there you'll get a flat damage absorption shield while buffing all of your damage by 64% at level 4, along with some fire retaliation and a buff to your retaliation damage as well. The fire retaliation, like I said with the previous ability, any retaliation is going to be good because we're going to be taking a lot of hits and we want those enemies to be dealing as much damage to themselves as we do to them. There is a single modifier for Ascension as well, and that is called Clarity of Purpose. But basically, while the Ascension is activated, you're going to get a % increase to offensive ability, you're going to get 100% life and energy leech resistance, and you're going to reduce stun, freeze, petrify, and entrapment durations by quite a bit. So ultimately, Ascension is going to be a very, very strong defensive tool, and it is going to give you the ability to crit harder with the more points we've got into it. That's going to couple extremely well with Presence of Virtue, but the percentage increase that you have on that offensive ability means that Clarity of Purpose is going to help you do a lot more critting come late game time. The next ability that you're going to want to take at least 1 point into is going to be Resilience, and this is another one that will do effectively more in the late game, but Resilience is going to activate once you drop below 66% of your health, It's got a 15-second cooldown for a 5-second duration, but while that duration is going, you're going to get a % increase to your defensive ability, making you harder to hit, and you're going to again increase your healing effects. After those healing effects get buffed, you are going to be looking at an increase to the cap of all of your resistances. Now, once this is maxed out at level 12, that is a 5% increase to the maximum of all of your resistances. So once you have those resistances overmaxed for ultimate, they're going to go 5% beyond that. And that is ultimately 85% if you have no gear that is also increasing your max reses. But for the sake of argument, this ability is going to make you 5% harder to deal damage to with every single resistance. You're also going to get the very rare physical resistance that comes with an ability, and again at level 12 you're getting 12% of that physical res, so by the time you hit ultimate you'll have this capped out, and that 12% is going to be very, very helpful. Now, there are 3 more abilities on the Oathkeeper side of things that are at least a bit more exciting than what we've gone over so far, and the first one is going to be the tried and true Vire's Might. Again, another ability I end up taking a lot of the time on any Oathkeeper build just because of the ridiculous amount of movement that it provides. When you use a shield while you are using Vire's Might, the shield damage is going to be added to your weapon damage. It's also going to deal physical and internal trauma damage while generating additional threat. So additional threat just means that your enemies are more likely to aggro you. Not that that's a big deal, considering that we're going to be the only guy on the screen who is willing to fight them. The single modifier for Vire's Might is Tectonic Shift, and the only reason that we want this is to increase the range and mobility options of Vire's Might by reducing the cooldown as well. So every point is going to give you 0.1 seconds off of the skill cooldown, and it is going to increase the range by 1 meter. You're also adding bleeding damage to the ability, but that's not typically what we're after. So just remember, more importantly for this build, we want it to go far, and we want it to be able to use it more often. So after you're done with those 2 points into the Vire's Might tree, you can look at Shattering Smash, which is basically the whole reason I even decided to put this build together at all. Shattering Smash is going to activate off of your weapon attacks, meaning your auto attacks, and it has at level 7 about a 23% chance to be used. So technically, every 4-ish auto attacks, that 4th one should be a Shattering Smash. And considering that this build is going to focus heavily on attack speed, we'll be whipping those bad boys out quite a bit. Now, Shattering Smash hits in an 8-meter range, which is pretty significant if you have seen it happen on the screen as of yet, but it's doing 122% of your weapon damage at level 7, while doing physical and internal trauma damage and reducing the target's physical resistances for 5 seconds. Shattering Smash is going to get buffed and it is going to get overmaxed once we get into Elite and Ultimate, but this ability in and of itself is just very cool in the way that it activates and the kind of damage that it does, so it was a must take for this build. The second one that we're going to activate in the same vein is called Smite. Smite activates with default weapon attacks or auto attacks as well, and the same story at level 7 is about a 23% chance to use. It hits in a 70-degree arc, which is a little bit of a weird number, but basically a cleave with a 3-target maximum, doing 143% of your weapon damage, physical damage, and fire damage as well, with a chance to stun the target for 0.7 seconds at level 7. Once we hit level 10, that'll go to a full second, but there you have it. It also does increased damage to undead and Chthonian enemies, so you're getting 20% extra damage to those damage types, meaning that Smite will be very good for knocking down the unbelievers and their disgusting undead thralls. Now, the final ability on the Oathkeeper tree, I don't recommend picking up right away because you'll want to start heading over to the Shaman tree to put points into those skills. But since we're here already, Divine Mandate is the exclusive skill that you're going to be taking for this build. at least for the time being. Maybe you end up taking Primal Bond over on the Shaman side of things, but for now, Divine Mandate is going to be exactly what we need it to be in terms of damage. Divine Mandate will activate as a passive, and it is adding a flat internal trauma damage to your kit, as well as buffing your crit damage, your physical, fire, and internal trauma damage, as well as your burn damage, and giving you some slow resistance on top of everything else. So this ability should ultimately be kicking all of your best damage types into overdrive, but at least for the normal playthrough, levels 1 through 50, you do not need too many points into Divine Mandate. The damage bump that you'll be getting from this passive is just going to be easier to feel as you get more gear that is increasing the internal trauma damage that you can do, and you get more opportunity to crit with more offensive ability. So don't fret about filling out your exclusive skill right away. Just go ahead and pick it up so it's activated and you can look all shiny and cool with it. Now is the point in the video though, we're going to flip it over to the Shaman tree, and I'm going to shock everybody right away with this first talent pick called Savagery. The astute among you may have noticed that there are 2 auto attack modifiers right down there on the hotbar, and I definitely asked myself if it was a good idea to have both of these for this build. The short answer is yes, they are very good. They both have very strong stats for what we're after in this build, and the use of the 2 is a lot easier than I initially predicted that it would be. So when you are using Savagery, you'll also be using Righteous Fervor. Just remember to have one of them tuned to your left click and one of them tuned to your right click. Savagery is going to do effectively the same thing, well, at least functionally, as Righteous Fervor. It's going to build up in charge levels. It deals lightning and bleeding damage as well as your weapon damage, but the modifiers work quite a bit differently. So Consecration is going to give you elemental resistance, and it is going to give you armor, but Tenacity of the Boar, which is the first modifier for your Savagery, is going to give you offensive ability and a resistance to slows. So basically, while Tenacity of the Boar is going, you're going to have more opportunity to crit, and that offensive ability that you're getting from Savagery is going to funnel into the parts of our Oathkeeper kit that are also buffing our offensive ability. The third modifier for the Savagery ability, though, is called Storm Touched, and Storm Touch will add electrocute damage to the ability baseline, but increase its physical damage as well as increasing its attack speed. You're also getting a buff to Lightning Retaliation, which may or may not be useful as we gear up, but the attack speed is going to be well worth it, and that couples incredibly well with Righteous Fervor. So while you switch between using the 2 of them and getting them both up to 6 stacks, you can get the maximum attack speed for both of them to help you out to do that. It really isn't as difficult as I thought it was going to be going into it. Really, you just hold down one of your clicks until you make it up to 6 stacks with either Savagery or Fervor, and then you switch over to the other one, get that to 6 stacks as well. By the time that you have either one up to that secondary 6 stacks, the other one will only have lost 1 or 2 stacks, meaning that you can flip right back over, build them right back up, and you're at maximum potential between both of these abilities. It does require a teeny bit of brain power, and you do have to look down there every so often to see the amount of stacks that you've got, but it is nowhere near as difficult as I initially thought it would be to keep them going and juggle that whole thing. So definitely don't pass up on the double auto attack changer for this build. Now, once you've got Savagery taken care of, you're going to take your only passive on the Shaman side of things, and that will be, you guessed it, Mogdrogan's Pact. Another build that is going to use the Pact quite well, and you only have to take 1 or 2 points into the initial ability itself. Mogdrogan's Pact is going to buff up your physical damage along with giving you some health and energy regen, which are never bad stats. But Heart of the Wild is your secondary mastery for this ability, and Heart of the Wild is going to give you another % health increase. So just like Haven, Heart of the Wild is going to give you a 24% increase to your base health at level 9, and it's also going to reduce the amount of duration of bleeding and poison damage. So when you get hit with those, they're going to last a shorter amount of time and deal effectively less damage. You're also getting a big increase to your health regen, but really the point that I want to drive home with Heart of the Wild is that percent health increase, because we're going to be stacking health with this build, and between Haven and Heart of the Wild together, we should have an absolutely colossal amount of health once we make it into the end game. So you're also going to want to pick up Oak Skin, which is the final modifier for Mogdrogan's Pact. Now, this one is giving you a flat defensive ability, flat armor, pierce and aether resistance, and a buff to all of your retaliation damage. And I can't think of better stats to have for a melee-focused, tanky, health-based character who is just going to do a lot of punching until everybody else falls down. Being the last guy standing is the entire spirit of this build, so if you are here for some quick glass cannon damage, you're in the wrong place. There's plenty of other build videos on this channel if you want to check out for that type of thing, but this build will be built for punching, for standing, and for never dying. But if you've made it this far in the video, if you're still listening, congratulations, you get to hear the smooth tunes of my YouTube voice. We do have a couple more things for this build that are going to make it a little bit easier to get from level 1 to 50, and those are mostly gear items, so perk up your ears, because number 1 is going to be your relic. The Sanctuary relic is very easy to get, and you can get it right out of level 25. Once you have Sanctuary equipped, it is going to be giving you a percent increase to your health bar, which should sound just music to anyone's ears for this build at this point. It's going to reduce the physique requirement for armor that you put on, so if you're right on the precipice of putting on some decent gear that you've picked up, Sanctuary is going to make it that much easier. You're also getting a big chunk of piercing resistance and a 20% chance to stun people that hit you with your stun retaliation. Now, the skill that comes along with Sanctuary is a 25% chance of activating a 2,250 damage absorption shield, which only works against a physical damage type, meaning that when stuff comes up to punch you in the face with its fists, we're going to take a lot less damage from them because it's got to go through our physical damage shield first. It's also going to reduce the stun duration, so if you are in the habit of getting stunned a lot early on in the game, this should help dilute that effect by quite a bit. With the relic out of the way, we're going to focus on a component, and that is called the Serrated Shell. Now, Serrated Shell is a component that you'll have to craft, but once you craft it, it's going to give you a minus 20% off the cooldown of your shield. So if you weren't aware, when you block in this game, your shield does have a cooldown until it can block again, so we're reducing that amount of time just by using this component. After that, you're getting 136 physical damage retaliation, so anytime that those bad guys hit you, they're hitting themselves as well, and you're going to turn right around and buff that retaliation by 20% because it's buffing all the retaliation damage that you do. After all those passive stats are out of the way, though, you're going to get an activatable ability with this component called Brutal Shield Slam. And this ability in and of itself is incredibly useful, especially once you've yanked everybody that you can in with Judgment. So when you use Brutal Shield Slam, it's going to activate in a 275-degree arc with a 3 target maximum, dealing 300% of your weapon damage while doing also physical damage and adding your retaliation damage to the attack that you do with this ability. So all of that buffing, all of that increase that we're getting of all of the abilities that we've taken so far for our retaliation damage is going to funnel right back into this ability and make cleaving some groups of enemies a lot easier. Use the Brutal Shield Slam as often as possible because it is a very short cooldown at 3 seconds, and I guarantee you'll be wiping people out with just the click of a button. After the serrated shell component, though, there's a couple more that will make better use of passive abilities. None of them have an activatable component to them, but you're going to want to use Scaled Hide, and that's going to give you a flat increase to your armor of 35, but it's also going to increase your armor absorption, meaning that your armor can take more damage when it does get hit. You're going to also pick up Mutated Scales, which is giving you a flat 180 health, and surprise, also giving you a 3% buff to your total health bar too. Next, you're going to want to pick up the Mark of Mogdrogan for your boots, because that's giving you 5% bonus to your health bar, along with an increase to your flat health regen, an increase to your overall health regen, and 10% movement speed. So after those are done, you're just going to want to look for an Ancient Armor Plate, which is going to increase your physique and your armor by flat amounts, increase your total armor pool by 8%, and increase your armor absorption by another 8%. So those components aside should make the grind from 1 to 50 a lot easier, and I am going to expect to see everybody back next weekend for the Elite part of the journey, where we talk about some devotions and getting this thing ready for Ultimate. But that is it for me, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out. I will see you all next time. Peace out.